Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episodes of Instinct. Obviously, this week's episodes were back-to-back, so I'm going to be talking about both episodes. I'm going to try to talk about them one at a time, but some stuff might bleed over through. But nevertheless, let's start off with the first episode. I mean, obviously, a lot of interesting things went down in both episodes, but in this particular episode, it focused on one particular case with the victim named Vivian, and it's kind of interesting like how obviously this kind of connects to the whole Sleeping Beauty case, because it's meant to look like it's kind of connected, but it might even be by the same person, but the case was very sloppy, and obviously, you know, which they kind of use that later on, but I'll get to that soon enough, because obviously the city's in a bit of a panic, because it's like, oh man, like, you know, because of the podcast last episode, now it's out there like, oh man, the Sleeping Beauty killer, and the fact is that so much of that was kept secret. Now you had the mayor kind of jumping down Jasmine's throat about everything, so they kind of have to, well, even have Dylan being like, okay, let's keep it quiet at first about this case not having anything to do with the Sleeping Beauty case, because they want to use and take advantage of that later on. Like I said, I'll kind of circle back to that. But in this particular case, it's a woman named Vivian, and it leads to a whole, well, interesting thing. It was just a small part of the episode, but I kind of felt bad about her protege. I forgot his name. Wasn't it Noah? Yeah, like he confessed his love to her. She didn't really reciprocate the love, and he was there waiting for her. He accidentally took her phone, and he got drunk until he ended up passing out on her bed. It's just kind of like one crazy event after another, and it's just kind of like, oh, and, you know, he never found out, you know, well, I'm sure he found out about Vivian, but we never get to see his reaction. It's just kind of like he had quite the night. But nevertheless, it turns out that Vivian's whole situation is actually connected to a sex club. I also love like when Dylan and the medical examiner, Emmy, found that tattoo on her arm. It was basically a symbol from the club or whatever, but I love them being like, oh, it could be this, it could be that. It's like, or it could be from a club, and both of them look at each other like, it might be that. I love, because they're like, you know, it's just kind of like, oh, what's this? Ooh, it's so interesting. And it's just like, yeah, Lizzie kind of hits a nail on a coffin with that. I love that basically in this, like, Lizzie's kind of got like all the she kind of keeps the case very grounded, being like, it's probably very simple through line of a case, but Dylan kind of adds on like, oh, maybe there's aspects of espionage and this and that. Like, he makes the case bigger than what it actually is in certain regards. But I do love the fact is that they have to go undercover at a sex club. Interestingly enough, obviously having to explain that to Andy. He didn't really go into full detail, but Andy seeing him get dressed up like that, it had him worried, because it's like, oh, it's Julia miking you up and everything. It's like, oh, are you back to your spy days? That's what immediately his brain went to. But it's like, no. He's like, no. It's nothing like that. He's just here for tech support. I'm going to a sex club with Lizzie. And it's like, Andy even admitted, he's like, I don't know why, but that honestly makes me feel a little bit better knowing that. Which we'll dive into the whole Andy and Dylan situation a little bit, but I love them in the sex club playing the couple and everything. It's actually kind of adorable. I also love the fact is nothing came about it, but the fact is they really hit it off of that other couple, and it's like, yeah, let's get out of here. But I love that Lizzie's put on an Australian accent, and later on they kind of make fun of it, and it's just like, oh yeah, because the dude's like, yeah, the person had a similar accent to you. It's like, you know, what were you? Was it Australian? Is that what you're trying to do? Poking fun at it, like her Australian accent was terrible or something. And then they're walking away, and it's like Dylan's poking fun of it, like, I'll get you a dialogue coach. She's like, my Australian accent was perfect. Funny enough, I had to look into it because I love bits like this. It turns out the actress who plays Lizzie, Bojana Novakovic, is Serbian and Australian. I just had to feel like, I was like, I gotta look into this, because I love when people do that. Like, an actor will just randomly like drop an accent in an episode, and people are like, oh wow, make fun of it being super terrible or something. Sometimes, or like being like, oh, because it will surprise you, be like, whoa, that seemed like, no, that's what seemed like it was real, and it turns out in her case, I think it was. So I just thought that was dope. I love when shows kind of poke fun at like realistic stuff. Like, you know, she probably at one point in time did have an Australian. I've never actually heard her talk outside of the show, so I don't know if she actually has an accent, because she could just be putting on an American accent for the show, so I don't know what her natural accent actually sounds like. She might actually sound the way like she does as Lizzie. I don't know. That's why I'm going to look into that. I'm very curious. But I just thought that was kind of neat. I love stuff like that. But nevertheless, but like I said, it was kind of interesting, because like I said, Dylan kind of got this thought like, oh, maybe this has something to do with South Africa and diamonds and blah, 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 come turning it into something bigger, like, oh, maybe a diplomat killed her. But it's like, no, basically the dude they ran into, Sasha, he had these, like he had heard about muggings in the area recently, and it turns out these muggings are actually connected because these people who were mugged why would they report anything? Because they'd have to explain, oh, why were you coming out of a sex club? So there's that whole thing. So it turns out the person behind all of this is the woman that was working at the hotel Belmark. Well, not hotel, but that place, the Belmark. It was Genma, what was it? Gemma. Jeez, I butchered that. I don't know what the hell I was going for. Gemma, which I should be able to do that just because it's like, well, Gemma, like Gemma Simmons from it just showed it. Nevertheless, I'm going on a tangent. Nevertheless, it turns out that she was robbing people basically because like her job kind of calls for her to kind of look like she's upper class, like she has a lavish lifestyle, but she doesn't get tipped by the people. And it's like, oh, they spend their money on drugs and sex clubs and gambling. Why shouldn't I get a piece of that? You know, they kind of treat me like I'm dirt. So that was her way of getting back at them. Like it just, things kind of went sideways and she accidentally killed Vivian, you know, and she just had to stage it to look like, oh, the Sleeping Beauty case. So it kind of throw people's scent off of her. It's actually kind of interesting because even Dylan was like, oh yeah, the fact is that she went this route because this way no one's really going to say anything because they don't want to admit like, oh yeah, I was at a sex club, so please, you know, can't really say nothing to people. Because if she went through the hotel, like, there'd be a paper trail, essentially. Like, oh, she's stealing credit card numbers and stuff like that. So this has less of a trail, so there's that side of things. But kind of talking about the Dylan and Andy thing, like, obviously they've recently been fighting about the color of the room. There's the whole situation of like, oh yeah, like I said, what color it should be. Should it be blue? But, you know, Andy has his idea. Dylan wants blue just because it's like, hey, this is my favorite color. But Andy has his particular favorite colors because not even his favorite colors. He wants colors that are gender neutral. So it's just not kind of like, oh, the child is this and that. So it's just kind of like, but Dylan kind of feels like color shouldn't affect, you know, a baby or something like that. There's no like impact and stuff like that. He thinks it's kind of all nonsense. But it turns out that it's kind of a bigger underlying issue because like obviously even Andy's like, yeah, I'm sorry. I actually got a little worried when I saw you and Julian here and you wearing that disguise like you were going undercover. It made him think of like, oh, Dylan in his old days. And it kind of worried him. But even Dylan admitted, like, yeah, being out there in the field, it felt good. Like going undercover again, it reminded him of his old days, his glory days, you know. And because even Julian had been like, oh, it kind of feels like the old days, don't it? But for Dylan, the moment he thought that Lizzie was in trouble, the fun kind of went away because it kind of made him go, holy crap, he started panicking like, oh, I hope Lizzie's okay. And in that moment thinks like, that's probably what Andy went through the entire time I was with the CIA. So it brings him closer in that regard of being like, yeah, you have more empathy because now you've literally been in that situation of understanding exactly what your partner went through. But also the whole thing of kind of realizing like this whole, both of them are afraid of being kind of not good at this whole parenting thing. Like Dylan's whole thing was like, oh, he was picking fights with Andy just so that it's because he's worried about his life being boring or something like that. He doesn't want to be a boring parent. And, you know, especially because he's given up on so many interesting aspects of his life, like the whole spyhood situation, you know, so just kind of compensating for that. I just thought that was kind of interesting. And on top of that, there's a complicated thing with like Lizzie and Julian. They have to work together and everything. And I love Dylan kind of poking fun of her. It's like Lizzie Needham, the woman who, you know, has got so much pep and just, you know, you being as tough as you are, tough as nails, and you're scared to talk to a boy. And it's like, she's like, rip the Band-Aid off, right? But like I said, things are still awkward to the point she kind of mocks, you know, being a little facetious towards Julian in certain regards about like this case being like, oh, I'm interested to dive deeper and step into a world, this like dark spy world that you and Dylan come from, you know. So, but even the entire time he was worried about her, like when things like, oh, hey, I don't know if Lizzie's okay. I'm losing signal, so I can't be. But it's like, you know, so. No matter what the circumstances are, he does care about her. Interesting enough, and this kind of applies to this episode and next episode, I'll talk about it more probably then, is he ends up running into Maya, which, like, Dylan recognized her, and I was like, oh, and it's like, all right. And then we find out, you know, it's like, oh, her and Julian have a past. And he was like, yeah, I don't want you kind of running into her considering you're vulnerable right now. He's like, I'm not vulnerable. It's like, he's like, did you not just get your heart broken recently? And he's like, I don't know why you had to kind of put it like that, but sure. So there's definitely a past between Maya and Julian. Interesting enough, Maya is played by, is it like Reshima or Rishima? Shetty, she played Divya in Royal Pains. He was most recently in Blind Spot. Well, most recently, but it was like season 3, I'm going to say. She played Reed's girlfriend, Megan. Like, I was like, holy shit. So I thought that was kind of pretty dope. And kind of getting her in this show, too, being like a spy. Because apparently she works for MI6, which Julian used to work for. So it's understandable, like, why Dylan would know her, too. Because it's like, yeah, spies have to cross paths at some point in time. Especially if he was working with Julian. I'm sure that meant crossing paths with her like that, too. So that's kind of interesting. Potentially an ex. Well, your 2 exes are, in your life. You're working with Lizzie on a lot of occasions, and at the same time there's the whole situation potentially with your new old ex coming into town. It's a whole thing. But the interesting thing is with the whole Sleeping Beauty case is how they basically record the podcast and everything, and Ryan goes up there following what Dylan says to basically go like, oh yeah, like this killer, this is him, he's regressing, he's getting sloppy. The whole point was to kind of agitate him, to kind of get him to reveal himself, to kind of contact him. I even love when it was all said and done, Lizzie's like, why did Ryan ask you for help with that situation? The fact of the matter is he's almost kind of like treating you like a puppy or something like that. And he's like, don't be jealous. Essentially, there's enough of me to share or something like that. Oh, if you're gonna act like this now about Ryan sharing with me, we're not gonna have any fun at the sex club. I just love that line. So that was a lot of interesting things to go down. I'm not even talking about the conclusion of it. Is the fact is the killer does get in contact. He talks to Ryan, talk about the fact of the matter is the closer you get, the more murders that I'll commit. The fact of the matter is, he ends up being like, that wasn't me and stuff like that. But interestingly enough, Dylan points out something. It's like the killer got personal. He referred to you as Ryan. He got super confident. The fact is the way he was talking like that proves that the killer is someone that Ryan knows. I was like, ooh, now that's an interesting twist. So then the next part of the next episode deals with a ice skater. Figure skater. Her name is Emily. She was murdered. It's an interesting thing because basically Lizzie's kind of working on this case mainly by herself because Dylan's attention is mainly towards the Sleeping Beauty case. And I even love it when Jasmine kind of calls everybody in it later. I'm kind of I'm moving around, but I love the whole thing of like, oh yeah, like, okay, I got news. And it's like, Ryan is going back to Nebraska. And Jasmine's like, I would have hated it if I knew you back when The Sixth Sense came out. It's like, yes. And he's like, let me go with him. It's like, but you're working this case with, let me just finish up this case with Lizzie and I can go. And it's like, she was like, I forgot what she said. And he was like, no, I can definitely do it. It's no issue. It's like, oh. She was like, oh, I'm so glad that you're able to take time out of your busy schedule to go. And he's almost like, yeah, no problem. It's like, we could send, someone else, or you could send food. No, you're too busy with the case. It's like, no, we finish that up. And then it's like, oh, Fucci can go with him. It's like, no, you actually need someone smart. And it turns to Fucci. He's like, no offense. And Fucci's like, why would I be offended? And it's kind of like, Lizzie's like, no, you should I'm fine with him going. And even Fucci's like, I'm fine with him going too. I love Jasmine kind of getting frustrated because everyone's telling her just like, yeah, no, we should do it like this. It's like questioning her leadership. She's like, fine, whatever, just get out my office. I love Fucci being like, you should do something else because that stress ball, it almost seems like it's making you even madder. What she'd probably do is hit the gym or go shoot something, and she throws a ball in his face and it's like, get out. I love that. But essentially, they had brought up the fact is that there's the whole Hill situation. He's one of the cops that was helping investigate the murder in Garfield, Nebraska at that time. The whole, and obviously Ryan kind of takes a little offense to it at first. It's like, oh, saying that like he might have messed up and stuff like that just because we don't have any leads. Now we're kind of going back and we're going to trash him for, some small mistake he may have made or whatever. But then Ryan comes back later on and apologizes because he's like, your batting average is why I'm kind of like coming back. That's why I checked into it. But Hill made it seem like, yeah, there was some stuff that wasn't 100% there. He was just kind of be like, oh, the case is closed, like enough said. So, and there was that. So while they in Nebraska, Lizzie's kind of dealing with the case and whatnot. It involves an incel named Daniel. Obviously, that was interesting. And also the whole Stacy thing. Like, is that like something all across? Because I was trying to remember what they said about the whole incel thing. Was it something like, oh yeah, like he called women Stacy? Is that something all incels are doing? Or is it just because of him? Maybe it's like a particular incident with one particular girl. It kind of stuck with him. And now he just refers to all women as just Stacy, which is just interesting. I guess that's like a an incel trait or something like that. That was interesting. But I do love that Lizzie was working with Jasmine for this case because to kind of help her blow off steam. And it's so interesting to see her back in the field. And it's like, no, we got to warn her. Let's kick the door down. Lizzie just keeps knocking, and then Jasmine just kicks the door down. And it's like, okay, Jasmine. She gets super hyped in this episode about being out in the field, just like the way she handles things, the way she kind of interrogates, like grabs on Daniel when he calls Lizzie Stacy. And then, like, it's like, what was it? It's like, my dad. And it's like, okay, fine, you can go. And he's like, what? Really? And she's like, no, sit down. Daddy can't help you now. It's like, yo, Jasmine going hard, dude. I love it. But it turns out Daniel wasn't the one behind all these things. Even though he said all those terrible things online, that was something that Lizzie was kind of like, yeah, it doesn't make any sense because, you know, I mean, he had the stolen medal from her, sure, but it just didn't quite fit. So it's like, okay, what are we missing here? Because with someone like him and being as tough as Emily was, she would have been able to deal with him because whoever this was someone that she was afraid to talk to because she couldn't even tell her partner Mario, like, or figure skating partner Mario, that, you know, because she brought it up to him at first, but then she kind of was like, oh, never mind, forget about it. She was too scared to even tell him. And they brought up something interesting where they were like, yeah, the fact is her locks, there weren't added locks. They were all new locks, meaning that whoever she had issue with had a key to the place at first. That made me immediately think the coach. At the moment they said that, I was like, it was the coach. And luckily, you know, Emily had, you know, set up a camera to cover everything. I also love that, like, you know, they're looking for the nanny camera and Jasmine's just like tearing that teddy bear apart and Lizzie's just looking at her doing it. The whole XS4 situation. But yeah, sadly, it does turn out that it is her coach that basically he was making some advances on her, basically saying like, oh, if you don't let me do what I'm going to do, then it's going to ruin your career. But as she got older, you know, she had enough of it and was going to defend herself, even going to tell Mario, if not, you know, other people what he had done. So he killed her to cover it up. Because he tried to say like they were in a relationship and stuff like that until Lizzie pointed out, oh, you mean like this secret camera footage is going to show that how terrified she was and everything. So, and I also loved, you know, Jasmine doing her thing of just slamming him against the glass and arresting him. It's just like, oh, excess force. And Lizzie's like, nah, I'm sure the lieutenant's going to let that slide. I should also note, too, I love the fact it's the whole Daniel situation, the way Lizzie kind of broke it down. And Jasmine's like, yo, look at you sounding like Dylan. And it's like, yeah, I can't get him out of my head. Because I love that because Dylan was kind of worried that Lizzie wasn't really going to miss him. But you could tell, like, yeah, throughout the episode, Lizzie was missing having Dylan around. It's like, yeah, that's your partner. You're used to kind of working side by side, always having him there, and without him being there, you kind of felt bad, you know. I even love Jasmine being like, oh yeah, Dylan kind of rubbed off on you. If only you could rub off a little on Dylan. It's like, man, my job would be perfect. But it's like no chance of that ever really happening. So, but I love that Jasmine kind of referred to herself as like a Rambo, where she was like, yeah, I need to kind of get back to my job. It's like, yeah, it felt good to kind of blow off steam, but it's like, yeah, I can't trust myself with all, you know, back in that position and stuff like that. I got to go back in my lieutenant, you know, shoes and stuff like that. I just thought that was kind of neat. I also love the fact is that Dylan could tell that Julian was lying about the whole Maya situation. He was like, the fact of the matter is lack of eye contact. And in fact is you're overly cleaning your glasses. And he's like, or maybe it's just because my glasses are filthy, but it's like, yeah, I've only seen you act like this because of Maya. And he's like, we had one coffee, that's it. Basically, Maya was saying that if he was going to work with her, because they're after the same person that came after him, it's like basically corrupting the NYPD, you know, database thing for, you know, first respondent thing, like, that there might be a greater plan at play here, and it might just not stop with the NYPD. Maybe even the CIA might be compromised, hence why she doesn't want him to tell Dylan. So it's like you kind of get brought back in the fold, and that's kind of interesting. Going to have to lie to Dylan about this whole situation. And it's going to be interesting because like that was the whole reason why him and Lizzie broke up, was because the whole keeping secrets thing, dating a spy, not the easiest thing. Once again, I think it's going to be a complicated thing because it's like, oh, you're freshly broken up, plus his, you know, his other ex is in town, you know, especially because like, well, with her, it's like, that's not something you have to hide. Like that's a part that she can understand. She lives that life too, but I think it depends on where you are in your life and what you want. Is that the type of thing that obviously he likes his job and whatnot, but it's like, is that the type of relationship and person that Julian wants to be with, especially because he was like, he references something and she's kind of like, no, like that, kind of like that was the past. So what that past is exactly, I'd love to kind of get to know like what exists there, So then you have Ryan and Dylan in Nebraska. Obviously, Hill kind of comes off first off as kind of a hard ass. The fact is, it's like, oh yeah, you're here to kind of judge my work. The fact of the matter is, someone behavioral like you is like, oh, you pick up on details like this, like, oh, my wife worked for that family before, they shut down the place and everything. And he's like, yeah, sometimes I talk like that, and sometimes I just stay quiet and let people do the talking. So your wife worked at so and so, and he kind of got a little annoyed and he kind of walks away. But they go talk to the family, which obviously the daughter is the biggest, kind of being like, what the hell are you doing? Like, why are you back here? So you basically came here to tell us basically you have nothing because you don't even have any suspects. The mom and brother are a little more understanding under the circumstances, but they go talk to Hill. He basically points out, kind of gives them some other potential suspects. And it leads to an interesting conversation. I love that whole thing with Dylan, like where Ryan's like, Mom, are you eavesdropping? And then you have Dylan be like, no, like eavesdropping is so amateur. She runs a diner. She is a professional, and I love her being like, see, someone who finally understands me. But which is it's just adorable. I love that. It's like, oh, it's nice to kind of just meet his mom like that, and it's like, oh, she runs a diner and everything. That's nice. But Dylan kind of brings up something interesting. Is basically there's two different forms of nostalgia. I forgot what the other one he was talking about. But the biggest important one is restorative nostalgia. One nostalgia is kind of like people who can just separate it and be like, okay, the past is in the past, can enjoy it as it is, but then kind of move on with their life. Except for Garfield, that town itself is stuck as a restorative, nostalgia where everyone's remembering the good days and like, oh, how Garfield used to be, and unwilling to move on or let it go. Most of the town is like that. And it's interesting because it actually plays a role in them finding out who the killer is, and it ends up being Cormac, the first victim's son, because he's the one person in his town, one of the people in the town at very least, who has seemed to completely move on, whereas everyone else is just kind of, literally stuck in the past when it came to Garfield's situation, which obviously upsets Ryan and Dylan because, like, they literally met with him. He was right in front of them. What clicked in Ryan's head is he sees a picture of him and Cormac when they were younger, and the cowboy blanket was what they were using, so that's interesting. Especially because because obviously they were talking to the family, and obviously he was there, so all the information they had about him, about the killer and stuff like that they had figured out, they literally presented to him. And what did he say? The closer you get, the more killing I'm gonna do. And sadly, at the end of the episode, he ends up going back to New York, so now they have to a race to get back to New York before he ends up, killing more people. It's also interesting, too, so things kind of end on a more lighter note. I do like the fact is that Lizzie kind of called Dylan because you can tell she was missing him. And she's like, hey. And he's like, hey. And it's like, yeah. It's like, just trying to make small talk with him to a certain extent because, couldn't outright admit, like, yeah. Because she even was like, yeah, I don't know how you did it, but I couldn't get your voice out of my head. And he's like, yeah, oh, that sounds so bad, having my voice stuck in your head all the time. So I just thought that was kind of like a neat little thing. So obviously some big developments with this whole Sleeping Beauty case. I'm curious to kind of dive into this and understand more about what Cormac's reasoning would be to kill his own dad. And obviously everything else seemed like it was more so spun from like trying to cover his tracks, but then it seems like eventually he kind of grew to like it and turned it into a game, hence the whole, like, especially now it makes sense too why he would do what he did to Ryan, because it turned into a sport of like, oh, I'm gonna see if you could catch me, old buddy. Like, they have a connection, they're friends like that. So I'm very interested to see where this ultimately all takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.